Tom has always been a man who tried to see things as they are. Even those who believed in mysticism respected him for his ability to separate fact and fiction. Therefore, when he was offered to go to an abandoned prison in the southern United States, he took it as another interesting challenge. Tom did not believe in urban legends, that those who visited this place returned with empty eyes and whispered about what they saw. He was confident that he could find a rational explanation for everything that came his way. He planned to spend the night at this place to collect material for his article. Autumn could be cold in these places, so Tom took everything he needed with him: warm clothes, a flashlight, a dictaphone, and a camera. His goal was simple: to show that abandoned buildings can be scary only because of their condition and dark history. But there is nothing supernatural about them. It was easy to get inside. The gate was barely hanging on its hinges. Upon entering the building, Tom immediately felt a strange pressure in the air. It was unnaturally quiet, even for such a place. Usually in old buildings, you can hear creaks, rustles, the movement of rodents, but here there was a dead silence. Only his footsteps and the occasional drops of water falling from the ceiling broke this silence. The corridors of the prison were narrow and long, stretching away into dark corners, and it seemed that every step echoed in the void. There were traces of former life on the walls, inscriptions of prisoners, scratched or written in blood, yellowed newspaper clippings, remnants of old posters with reminders of discipline and rules. But what struck Tom most was the lack of anything new. Not a single beer can, not a single graffiti, not the slightest trace of a modern man. Tom continued to explore the building, taking pictures and recording his comments on a dictaphone. He wanted to capture every detail, every clue that could help him create a picture of the prison's past. In one of the blocks, he found old photographs scattered on the floor, probably once it was a security room. The pictures showed prisoners at the time of their arrest, captured against the backdrop of peeling walls and iron bars of the cells. Tom studied the faces of these people carefully, trying to understand how they felt at the moment when these pictures were taken. Fear? Anger? Doom? One of the photos especially caught his attention. It showed a man with a shaved head and an evil expression on his face. His eyes were looking directly into the camera, as if he saw the one who took his picture, and at the same time, the one who was holding this picture in his hands. Tom stared at this picture for a moment, feeling something cold run down his back. He put the picture in his pocket and continued his examination. The corridors of the prison became more and more confusing. It seemed that the building was leading him along its own route, devoid of logic. Tom tried to find a way out, but kept returning to the same doors and passages. He decided to go up to the second floor, hoping that it would be easier to navigate from there. It was even darker on the second floor. There were no windows, and the darkness swallowed everything around. Tom turned on the flashlight and saw that the walls were covered with some kind of green mold that seemed to glow in the dark. There were old mattresses on the floor, rotten and covered with torn blankets. There were still traces of old wiring on the walls, and in some places, there were torn wires. Tom tried to imagine how the prisoners lived here, how they spent their days in this darkness and filth. Approaching one of the cameras, Tom heard a strange sound resembling a faint moan. He stopped and listened. The sound was repeated, at this time more clearly. It was a muffled but distinctly human moan coming from the depths of the building. Tom knew that no one should be here, but the sound made his heart race. He headed in the direction of the sound, trying not to make too much noise. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, and the moaning grew louder, but it remained muffled, as if breaking through thick walls. Tom reached the end of the corridor, where there was a massive iron door covered with rust. He pushed it open, and it gave way with difficulty, opening with a shrill squeak. There was a small room beyond the door, illuminated by a dim light. In the center of the room, a man was sitting on the floor, tied to a chair. He was wearing an old, tattered prison uniform, and his face was covered with bruises and cuts. Tom couldn't believe his eyes. It was the same man from the photo he found. His eyes were closed, and his head was hanging down on his chest. Tom froze in horror, not understanding what was happening. He came closer and gently touched the man, trying to wake him up. At that moment, the man opened his eyes and stared straight at Tom. His gaze was full of pain and despair. Tom saw his lips moving slowly, but he couldn't make out the words. He leaned closer to hear what he was trying to say. Tom leaned closer, trying to hear what this man, who by all signs had been dead for a long time, was trying to say. His lips moved slowly, forming words soundlessly. Tom realized that he couldn't make out anything without a sound, and leaned even closer, feeling for a moment the putrid smell coming from the prisoner's body. "They will come back," the man croaked with an effort, and a barely audible wheeze escaped from his mouth. His eyes, full of pain and despair, did not let go of Tom's gaze, as if trying to convey something important to him. With that, his strength ran out, and his head fell back onto his chest. Tom recoiled, feeling cold sweat trickle down his forehead. Couldn't believe what was happening. It was impossible. The man on the chair looked like a dead man, already decomposing, but he had just spoken. Thoughts began to flash through Tom's head. Maybe this is some old prisoner who was forgotten in prison, and he just died a slow death here all these years? Or is it a figment of his imagination caused by fatigue and tension? But then, how to explain it? Barely able to control himself, Tom got up and began to look around, trying to find answers. He looked at the walls and ceiling, checked every corner of the room, found nothing. The room was empty except for a chair with a dead prisoner in it. Tom noticed an old, cracked calendar on the wall. The last sheet was torn off in the mid-80s. It's strange that nothing has changed here in all these years. Tom took out a dictaphone and turned it on, trying to record his observations. "I'm in a room. I don't know what kind of place this is, but there's a dead man who just talked to me. He looked like a prisoner, at least his uniform indicates that. But he couldn't stay here all these years. It's impossible. We need to find answers." But when Tom stopped recording and decided to check it, he found that the sound was gone. Instead of a voice, he heard only a booming, intermittent silence, accompanied by some strange interference. Tom couldn't believe his ears. His voice recorder had never failed him before. Feeling the adrenaline pumping into his temples, Tom realized that he needed to get out of here immediately. He didn't know what was going on. There was no point in staying in this prison anymore. Everything he saw and heard violated the laws of reality, which he had always considered inviolable. No matter how hard he tried to find a rational explanation for what was happening, his mind could not accept what he saw. Tom left the room and found himself back in the dark, damp hallway. His footsteps echoed through the empty walls, and it seemed to him that they were repeated many times, as if the echo had become a living being watching him. The corridor seemed endless, and every turn seemed to bring him back to the same point. With each step, the tension inside him grew, and his mind clung to one thought: to get out. When he finally reached the stairs leading down, his legs felt weak. He had seen this staircase before, but it looked different. Now her steps were worn and covered with dirt, as if they had not been used for years. Tom began to descend, feeling every step creak beneath him, as if it was ready to collapse under his weight. It seemed that time in this building flowed according to its own rules, not obeying the usual laws of physics. When Tom went down to the first floor, he heard that strange moan again, which now became louder and closer. It did not come from a single point, but seemed to surround him from all sides, filling the space. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, trying to concentrate. The sound grew louder, turning into something more than just a moan. It was a noise, a hum of voices, a tangle of whispers and screams that his brain couldn't process. When Tom opened his eyes, he realized that he was in the center of a large hall surrounded by cell doors. He didn't remember how he got here. Previously, this place seemed to him to be part of another floor. The hall was empty except for one cell, which was ajar. The light from his flashlight filtered through the misty haze and fell on its rusty grill. Tom slowly approached the camera, trying to look inside. His fingers touched the bars, and at that moment the door abruptly opened with a loud creak. Tom recoiled, his heart beating faster. He shone the flashlight inside, illuminating the cold concrete floor and walls on which words were scratched, long, scattered phrases as if someone had written them in a panic. The words, "don't believe," "stuck," and "they're here" stood out among them. There was something strange inside the cell. There was an old notebook lying on the floor, the cover of which looked worn out, and the pages were yellowed with age. Tom carefully picked it up and opened it to a random page. Inside the notebook were notes that someone was making, apparently while in captivity. The recordings were chaotic and incoherent, but one message was repeated over and over again. "They come every night. They're taking us away one by one." Tom felt an icy chill roll down his back. He looked at the walls again, then at the notebook. It seemed like someone had left this message especially for him. For the first time in his entire career, Tom felt not just fear, but terror that penetrated to the very depths of his consciousness. He closed his notebook and quickly returned to the cell door, but his gaze lingered on one of the corners. There, on the floor, was a metal object, an old, rusty chain with a lock. Tom came closer and saw that the lock was closed, but the chain was broken. He remembered the prisoner's words. "They will come back." What if that man really was a prisoner here? What if he wasn't alone? Tom took a step back when he heard a sound behind him, a loud, distinct knock. He turned quickly, pointing the flashlight at the source of the sound. Saw nothing. The sound was repeated, and Tom realized that it was coming from above. It was the sound of footsteps, heavy and measured, as if someone was walking down the corridor above him. Without waiting for the footsteps to get closer, Tom rushed out of the hall. He knew he had to get outside while he still could. His breathing became rapid, his thoughts confused. He did not stop. The doors leading to the street were very close. When he reached them, his hands were shaking so much that he could barely grab the handle. In desperation, Tom yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. He pushed it again and again, but the door remained in place, as if sealed from the inside. Tom felt despair creeping over him. He slammed his shoulder into the door, hoping to break it. Nothing happened. At that moment, footsteps became clearly audible behind him, getting closer every moment. He turned around and saw shadows moving along the walls of the corridor, becoming clearer with each step. Tom dropped the flashlight, his hands frantically reaching for the pocket where the notebook was. He pulled it out and started flipping through the pages, looking for something that could help him. At the last moment, his gaze fell on one of the entries. "The only way out is down." Tom realized that he didn't have time to think. He turned back and ran to the nearest descent, leading to the basement. There was a loud bang in the hallway behind him, as if the door had opened and someone was chasing him. He went down the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the pain in his legs and the sharp, metallic smell coming from the basement walls. When he reached the basement, Tom found himself in another corridor, even narrower and darker than the ones upstairs. He chose a direction at random and ran forward, lighting his way with the dim light from the flashlight. The walls here were damp and covered with thick mold. Tom could feel the cold creeping into his bones, but he knew he couldn't stop. After a while, the corridor suddenly ended. In front of Tom was a massive metal door, speckled with rust and dirt. Tom pushed it open, and the door opened with difficulty, letting him out. He found himself in the backyard of the prison, surrounded by high fences with barbed wire. The night sky was overcast, and the wind was chilling his sweaty face. Tom didn't linger. He rushed to the fence, hoping to find at least some way out. But when he looked around, he realized that the fence was too high and dense. The only way out was the gate in the distance, leading to the old road. His footsteps echoed hollowly across the deserted courtyard as he ran towards the gate. He didn't know how long it had been since he entered the prison, but every step brought him a feeling of unspeakable relief. The gate was nearby. Suddenly he heard a familiar sound behind him. Slow, measured footsteps, much closer this time. Tom turned around and saw a figure appear out of the darkness, dressed in the same ragged prison uniform as the man in the cell. It was him, the same blank eyes and frozen expression that Tom had seen him with in the photo. But now he was coming straight at Tom. Tom turned around and saw a figure appear out of the darkness, dressed in the same ragged prison uniform as the man in the cell. It was him, the same blank eyes and frozen expression that Tom had seen him with in the photo. But now he was coming straight at Tom. Tom started to back away, but the figure continued to approach, its footsteps getting louder and heavier. At that moment, Tom realized that his only chance was to get to the car. He rushed to the gate, glancing back at the prisoner chasing him for a second. Fortunately, the gate was unlocked. Tom ran out onto the old road leading to the place where he had left the car. His heart was pounding and his breathing was getting ragged, but he knew he couldn't stop. When he reached the car and quickly opened the door, his hands were shaking so much that the keys almost fell out of his fingers. He put them in the ignition, turned it, and the car roared into life. Tom's gaze lingered for a moment on the dark road leading back to the prison. But there, in the distance, where the gate stood, he saw nothing. The ghostly figure of the prisoner disappeared as if it had never existed. Tom stared at the empty road for a long time, his heart gradually calming down. He took a deep breath, knowing that he would never return to this place again. Turning the car around, he left the prison grounds, leaving this creepy place behind forever. Driving along an abandoned road, Tom began to realize that in the last few hours his life had changed forever. What he saw and experienced disrupted his usual perception of the world. Now he knew that some places and things were better left alone, and that there were stories that didn't need to be explained.